my advice to companies pitching is to provide some concise context. I mean, the audience, we might know business, but we don't necessarily know your business, and we're interested. So share your unique value proposition, what differentiates you, and how you're ultimately going to build a sustainable and scalable business that will give a return to investors.
I think the most important thing is to get your message across. So the pitch should be very well organized, clearly define the problem, clearly address how your company solves the problem. And since these are investors, make a case for financial gain for the investor.
So I think the most important thing for the companies presenting today is to be authentic and fully represent your business, good, bad, and ugly. Your bad isn't necessarily the same bad to us as investors, and so it's not necessarily a deal breaker. So what's more important is knowing what we're getting into, how we can help, and how we can help you scale. And so I would just say fully represent your business and be authentic.
So your company's goal and mission is incredibly important, but what investors want to know is how is it that you're going to take the money that I'm going to invest or we're going to invest, and how is it that you're going to use it, and how is it that the investors are going to get a return on what it is that they've invested?
Be realistic about the market you're going after. I don't want to hear companies and entrepreneurs talk about 20, 30, 40 billion dollar markets when they're doing less than a million in revenue. Tell me how you're going to get from 1 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 250, and then I'm listening.
Welcome to PAC's Mid-Atlantic Capital Conference. Please welcome Dean Miller, President and CEO of PACT.
All right. Welcome to the 2025 PAC Mid-Atlantic Capital Conference. All right. It's early quiz time, so I'm taking my reading glasses off. If this is your first conference, raise your hand. Holy shit. Okay, I didn't expect that. If you've been here before, raise your hand. If you've been here for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years. We have been doing this event for over 30 years, and it gets better every year. And why? Because of the entrepreneurial energy and talent. It's incredible, and I want to thank you all for supporting PACT and the Mid-Atlantic Capital Conference. We, PACT, are honored to play an integral role in supporting the growth of entrepreneurship in Philadelphia and the Mid-Atlantic region. We focus on building connections to capital, to mentors, to talent, to business. We could not do this without an incredible PACT team, led by Jen DeVore and Conference Director Cheryl Jarvis Johnson, the incredible entire team. Please, a round of applause for the Dream PACT team. I also want to thank all of our sponsors of the Capital Conference and our founding leaders, our PAC founding leaders. You make this happen. What do I mean by that? You step up so that entrepreneurs can access this event and our programs throughout the year with little barrier to entry. Thank you. We have an incredible day planned for you. But before we get to those details, did you have fun last night at Reading Terminal Market? All right. Cheesesteaks, DeNick's roast pork, Bassett's ice cream. I hope you didn't miss any of it. I want to thank our PACFest sponsor, Troutman Pepper Lock, for an incredible opening party to kick off and set the tone for the Capital Conference. And a shout out particularly to partners Chris Miller and Tom Dwyer and the entire Troutman team. Please, a round of applause. I also want to thank all of the investors who came out yesterday afternoon for the LPGP Symposium, sponsored and hosted by DLA Piper. Again, a shout out to managing partner of DLA Piper, Fad Riaz, and his team for hosting yesterday's event. Yes, a round of applause, please, for them. Also, thanks to our host of the investor reception that was put on by EVCA, the Emerging Venture Capital Association, and VC and DC, with shout outs to Matt Gittleman and Evan Cannon from Osage, one of our next gen leaders. All right, 2 seconds on important reminders. Number one, download the mobile app. You find it at Let's Rally. If there's any problems, if you have any questions, go to registration. Someone will help you. There are printed agendas. This is as much as you're going to find. No books. So this printed agenda can help you along with that mobile app. We have one-on-one meetings and happy to help facilitate those. Heidi Franklin is at the registration desk and can help with that. We have 65 exciting company presentations from early to growth across healthcare, tech, life sciences, and other areas. And this year, we're actually on 2 floors because we have that many companies. So tech and growth will be here on the 5th floor. Healthcare life sciences track is on the 4th floor, a short escalator ride away. There'll be directional signs, volunteers help you navigate, and should go really smoothly. All right, so much to say, so little time. 2 things. I mentioned mentoring, one of the things that we do. And yes, we have an award-winning mentorship program. It's called Mentor Connect. It's a collaborative program with Ben Franklin Technology Partners. We're in our 10th year, and 10th year of this program, and have served over 350 mentees. By the way, many of them presenting here today. We have 150 mentors who give tirelessly to that program. And if you're interested in learning more about that, see me, see my partner Jen DeVore today or after this program. Secondly, I mentioned NextGen. Our NextGen Leaders Program, another talent program, is our leadership program for up-and-coming leaders. We have 20 participants in our inaugural cohort. Many are here today. Many are actually involved in the leadership of this conference, including Evan Cannon, Amy Branson, and Molly Crane. Please, a round of applause for all of them. I promise I am almost done talking. All right, now I got good news and I got bad news. Here's the good news. The good news is that Pennsylvania's leaders are locked in a room as I speak, hammering out a budget. And for those of us who are from Pennsylvania, this is good news because we have no budget. The bad news is that Governor Shapiro is in that locked room. And he will not be able to join us today. I know, sigh, disappointment. But that is just about the best excuse that he could have had, and he did send this message. He said, "I'm sorry I cannot be with you today, but know that I am a big supporter of all you do to grow innovation. Entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of our economy and a key to our competitiveness globally. Thank you for your incredible efforts. Know that PA is open for business and operating at the speed of business. Congratulations to Dean Miller, Jen DeVore, PAC for bringing together such an impressive group of entrepreneurs, investors, and business executives from near and far. Josh." All right, not too bad. Now here's one thing he added. For any Pennsylvania residents that are here today, 50% off your taxes. That's actually not true. And he did not approve that remark. It is now my pleasure to introduce one of the leaders of this effort. The Mid-Atlantic Capital Conference does not go on without incredible support, but a lot of leadership from a lot of different places, and there is none higher than the chair and host of this year's conference and the sponsor of this breakfast session. Please welcome the PAC board member, partner at Blank Rome, and chair of this year's conference, Josh Strober.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us. Please, a round of applause for Dean and his money green pants. Blank Rome is so proud to serve as host, and I'm delighted to serve as the chair of this year's conference. We look forward to a terrific day of discussions, presentations, and networking. As a national law firm headquartered in Philadelphia and focused in the Mid-Atlantic area and the areas of entrepreneurship, emerging growth, private equity, and venture capital, we've been a longtime ally of PACT, longtime sponsor, and so happy and excited to be affiliated with the conference this year. I'd like to acknowledge the Blank Rome team for their work and efforts in making today a success. In particular, Molly Crane, Mike Sawyer, Pete Saflias, Eric Kaufman, and the rest of our marketing organization. Now, some thank you notes. Please hold your applause to the end. Thank you. We'd like to start by thanking our industry vice co-chairs Our technology co-chairs, Evan Cannon, Associate Osage Venture Partners, and Amy Branson, Vice President, New Spring Capital. Our healthcare co-chairs, Kathy Jordan, Managing Director, Healthcare Investment Group, Ben Franklin Technology Partners, Sabria Stukes, Partner, SOSV, Nishant Rastogi, Vice President, Head of Transactions, New Rain Healthcare Investors. A thank you to the executive, steering, and planning committees for their wonderful work over the last 10 months. We thank our over 60 sponsors for their support and guidance for this year's event. A big thank you to Mark Letterman of New Spring Capital for his leadership on the Lion's Den. More on the Lion's Den in a moment. And a thank you to our premier sponsors, RCCB Law, who's sponsoring the branded water bottles you'll see around you, First Bank Trust, who is sponsoring the lanyards, JP Morgan, who is sponsoring the branded charging stations, Morgan Lewis and Trinet, who are sponsoring the investor meetings and networking breaks, DLA Piper, who sponsored yesterday's GPLP Symposium, and the Penn Center for Innovation and Penn Engineering. One more thank you to Dwayne Morris for sponsoring our entrepreneurs this year under the Dwayne Morris Entrepreneur Sponsorship Program. Be sure to stop by and say hello to this group of folks who might be next year's company presenters. Finally, a special thank you to Dean Miller, Cheryl Jarvis Johnson, Jen DeVore, and the PAC team. They do an incredible job putting on this event each year, and I think we, as a community, can be really proud of the work that they do on our behalf. All right, some housekeeping items that Dean asked that I move through quite quickly. First, we have our one-on-one curated investor meetings for technology in Salon D on the 5th floor, and for healthcare in Franklin Hall 3 and 4 on the 4th floor. We also have a quiet workspace available for all attendees. If you've got to shuffle away and get to your day job, please head to the space located on the 5th floor, registration desk number 1. We ask that you please turn your cell phones to vibrate or silent during the event. And we ask that you please keep your name tag with you at all times. That is the way that you get into all of our various sessions. Otherwise, Jen DeVore PAC will have security kick you out. Lastly, on to our agenda. So company presentations are going to kick off immediately after this breakfast. The 6 concurrent sessions of featured company presentations are being sponsored by EY, Fairmount Partners, and Fox Rothschild. The morning presentations will run from the end of this breakfast until 11:10, and then after a short networking break from 11:30 to 12:45. Salons A and BC will host the technology presentations on the 5th floor, and Franklin Hall 1 and 2 will host the healthcare presentations on the 4th floor. I know that Dean called out the agenda. Please consult your agenda with any questions. There's also signage throughout, and then please ask any member of the PAC team if you have any issues finding any of the rooms. After the morning sessions, we'll come back here for lunch, which is sponsored by KPMG and starts at 12:15. The luncheon will feature our keynote speaker, Bernie Banks. Bernie serves as Director, Door Institute for New Leaders, Rice University, and is a retired Brigadier General. I think he's going to have a great discussion. We'd love to see you all there. After lunch, company presentations will resume from 1:30 to 2:30, followed by a brief networking break from 2:30 to 2:45. After the networking presentations, we'll have a technology panel sponsored by Bank of America in Salon BC on the 5th floor. We'll also have a concurrently running healthcare panel sponsored by Independence Blue Cross in Franklin Hall 1 on the 4th floor. These panels are going to run from 2:45 to 3:30. From 3:30 to 4, we'll take our last networking break of the day as a lead up to the much anticipated Lion's Den, which is sponsored by Cozen O'Connor and RSM. The Lion's Den is going to run from 4 to 5:15 in Salon EF on the 5th floor. For those who haven't seen it before, the Lion's Den is PAC's version of Shark Tank. and it's going to give an opportunity for today's top 3 presenting companies to pitch directly to a high-profile group of investors right here. The Lion's Den is going to be moderated by Mark Letterman of New Spring Capital and is always a hit at the conference, and we invite you to join the Lion's Den and the performance that's put on. Following the Lion's Den and the conference, we'll conclude with the closing reception sponsored by Eisner Amper and New Spring Capital, which is going to be held outside of Salon EF on the 5th floor. And now we're delighted to have our breakfast keynote speaker, Jeff Eggers, co-founder and managing partner of R Squared VC. Dean, would you join me back up on stage to introduce Jeff?
Thank you, Josh. All right. 2025 marks the 250th anniversary of 3 divisions of the armed services. The Navy, founded right here in Philadelphia, across the street in Independence Hall. Jeff Eggers was not alive then, but if he was, I have no doubt he would have been first in line to sign up. Jeff is a retired Navy SEAL officer, yes, a real badass, who has also been the National Security Advisor. Let me repeat that, the National Security Advisor to Presidents Bush and Obama. And after government, he founded and ran a leadership institute, co-authored a best-selling book on leadership, and 6 years ago, he joined our ranks. He co-founded a venture firm, R Squared Ventures, that is an early-stage VC firm focused on frontier technologies most critical to our national interest. They deployed 2 funds and are now raising their 3rd fund. How do we get connected with Jeff? We have an incredible group of veteran entrepreneurs in the region, including Chris Milaro, founder and CEO of NeuroFlow, who's in this room. Chris is an incredible entrepreneur, a veteran, a Enterprise Award winner, and a mentee, a past mentee in our Mentor Connect program. He deserves all the credit for helping to connect us with Jeff. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Eggers to the stage.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Dean. And good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be with you. First of all, it is the case that I was introduced to PACT through Chris Milaro. Thanks for that, Chris. He's one of 2 founders we now have in Philadelphia. I have 3 portfolios of about 47 companies now. Chris is here this morning. It's great to see you. Chris is a Series C company. My other company is still a seed, pre-seed company, which explains why they're not here, perhaps. But it's an honor to be with you. Dean asked me to speak a bit about leadership. I think about leadership now mostly through the lens of watching, these 47 CEOs, and I learn a lot from people like Chris watching them, and that's my primary responsibility now. I started as a practitioner in, as you heard, the U.S. Navy, and I went into the Navy as a Navy SEAL to become a practitioner, and that's what. Can we go ahead and bring the slides up, please? The idea was to really give myself the most sort of intensive experience in leadership possible. And that's why I went into the SEALs. And truth be told, I think the reality was I wasn't very good at it. So at some point in my Navy career, I migrated from being the practitioner to being an advisor to other senior leaders in the national security realm. And as you heard, I worked for 2 U.S. presidents. Go ahead and put the slides back up, please. Both Presidents Bush and Obama. And I spent 6 years in this building sort of as an observer to senior leaders. And the experience was an amazing one, but eventually I left. And I left because at this point I had small children and I never saw them. And I left to go start the Leadership Institute Dean told you about. But before I left, I decided I have to take my son to work with me. He was only 2 years old at the time. I was like, they're never gonna let me back in this building. So I've got to bring my son to work, and his name's Eric. I asked him one morning, Eric, would you like to go to work with Dad? Would you like to go see the White House? And he got really excited. He was like, let's do it. So I bring little Eric into the West Wing. We walk in, and as we're walking in, I look down at little Eric, and he's crying. He's bawling his head off. And it turns out we had had a giant misunderstanding, because the whole time I'd been saying, would you like to go see the White House, he thought I'd been saying, would you like to go see a lighthouse? Which is our first lesson of the morning, which is never take yourself or your job title too seriously in leadership. It's also a reminder that my son loves everything about the beach. This is Eric's first trip to the beach, the Outer Banks. He was 2. He loved it. How many of you took a beach vacation last summer? So I did not. I don't love the beach at all. And it will be evident when I show you this picture of my first trip to the beach. Like Eric, I was also 2. I just had a very different experience. I cried. It was miserable. And it'll really make sense when I tell you that my second trip to the Pacific Ocean was to the exact same beach, almost exactly 20 years later, and I had almost exactly the same reaction. The only difference the second time was I didn't cry as much. This, of course, was SEAL training, and not only did it make me a hater of the beach, it meant that I spent the rest of my career, quite literally, in pursuit of this question. What makes for a high-performing team? And it was a coincidence, because in my first week of training, I was grabbed out of the water by an instructor who dragged me up the beach and put me in front of a journalist from Fortune magazine who was writing an article about this question. And I've been sort of in pursuit of this question ever since. Now, this journalist was going around the world talking to all these high-performing teams: Tokyo String Quartet, Trauma Center at Boston General, Offensive Line at Dallas Cowboys, and Racing Pit Crews. And I like to start with the Racing Pit Crews because they're fun to watch and visually exciting. This is a near record-breaking tire change by the Ferrari Formula One team. So reasonably decent performance. And at one point in my private sector consulting career, I had a partner that I worked with that actually was in the business of training these teams. And we talked about these teams all the time. And at some point I said, we've got to stop talking about the race cars, because it's a terrible model for these people. There is nothing about this that means anything to them. It's over-resourced. It's all based on predictability and choreography. We've got to stop talking about the race cars. But then one day we had an agreement that there was something to like about the race car example. And his point was something that's missing from the picture. It's something you don't see in this picture. Because what you don't see in this picture, quite simply, is a leader. And that was an important point, which led into a discussion about sort of decentralized models of performance. And the reality from our studies is that decentralized models lead to higher performing organizations, right? Now, we don't study race cars as decentralized performance because it's choreographed. And if you want to go to the other end of the spectrum, you need to go to systems that are very complex and fully decentralized. And where do you find that? In nature. This is a murmuration of starlings. There's been a lot of research on this. Starlings are a decentralized system that has exceptionally good performance in real time in response to a chaotic environment. If you ever get the opportunity to see one of these, it is something that induces a lot of awe. This is one in the United Kingdom. Another example from my personal past, I used to be a beekeeper, bee colonies. Bee colonies are decentralized. The queen just lays eggs. That's all she does. And yet they make really good decisions as a colony. And there's been a lot of research. How is it that bee colonies can make such great decisions without the benefit of a leader? How do they do that, and why do they do that? And the research suggests that the colonies have evolved this way because this system inoculates the colony from the adverse effects of any single bad bee. Now, if I put that into terms that you can use, what nature's trying to tell us is that domineering leadership styles are an impediment to performance. And I say that because I used to be a domineering leader, and that style of leadership almost got 2 of my own people killed. It happened here in Iraq, west of Fallujah, along that road you see along the Euphrates River. We had a mission one night where one of our gun trucks got hit by an improvised explosive device, and this was the outcome. And the 2 gentlemen in the front seat of that vehicle very, very nearly lost their lives. And it was 110% because I, thinking I was the smart leader on the scene, made a change to the plan in the moment, and very nearly sent those men to their deaths. And in hindsight, that is clear as day. Now, the good news is those men lived. By coincidence, there was a level 1 trauma center just down the road, and the evacuation itself was chaotic. I wasn't on the scene. It was just a bunch of people in the dust and in the chaos that knew what they needed to do, and they got it done, and those 2 men lived. Domineering leadership almost killed them. Decentralized execution allowed them to live. I'll give you another example. This is Abu Musab Zarqawi, who was then the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, what we now call ISIS. And back then, we spent a lot of time looking for this man, because he was the number one. Spent a lot of nights running around Iraq looking for this person. And one night, we got indications he was sleeping on a farm outside of Fallujah, so we dropped what we were doing, did a massive helo assault. I was, again, the ground force commander. Go in with all these helos, about 100 men, and the mission went terribly wrong. For one thing, one of the helos had hard landing and a blade strike, and it was now out of commission, which was a problem because we needed it to get home. As we got to the farmhouse, the farmers started telling us, no, Zarqawi's gone. He'd already left earlier in the day. He's not here anymore. So there's this question, should we stop what we're doing and go look at the next farm over? But probably the worst thing that happened is we used explosive breaching charges in the course of doing this. And one of them over-penetrated that night into the structure and injured some of the women that were sleeping there. And they now needed medical attention, and they didn't want that medical attention from us. And I remember standing outside the farmhouse, which was sort of my job, listening to all this chaos in my headset. What are we going to do? Are we going to run to the next farm? Are we going to take these women with us on the helo against their will, and so on and so forth? And I remember that night thinking, what do I do as the leader? What's the call? And what I did that night is I decided to take a step back and just get on the radio and try to find us a new helicopter. And I found that the more I took that approach of letting things get worked out at a lower level and sort of entrusting people, the better things went. But I had grown up thinking that that wasn't my job. My job was to make good decisions. And I ended up at the back end of my career thinking, no, you don't own the decision, you own the outcome. And that's about it. And as much as I learned the hard way in Iraq and Afghanistan, the place where I really learned a lot the hard way again in leadership was the 4 years I spent driving these things. I was a specialist in undersea special operations. That's a mini sub. That was my less preferred vehicle. It's relatively primitive by today's standards. As you can see, you have to be on dive status the whole time, so there's real limits to what you can do with this thing. But it's still very powerful. My preferred vehicle was this one, called the Advanced Seal Delivery System. I spent a lot of time on that mini sub. It's dry on the inside, so it's much more comfortable. But it's very sophisticated, and we could do what you see here. You could anchor on the bottom, you could lock stuff out of this thing, and we could do it anywhere in the world without anybody knowing about it. So you can only imagine the kinds of things that you could do with this. And people sometimes ask me, wow, that's really cool. I'm like, nope, it didn't look like that, not once. Everything we did was at night, so if anything, it looked a little bit more like that. But the reality is everything we did at night, and we did it without the benefit of any lights, so it really looked a lot like that. It wasn't very glamorous work, and we can't talk about most of it still, but I'll tell you a little bit about another night where things again went wrong. My swim buddy and I just locked out of the bottom of the sub, and a piece of equipment I was responsible for, I sort of fumbled, and it was very heavy, and it was basically now going to the bottom of the ocean, but I was attached to it. I got snagged on it, and it was taking me with it. The good news is I was physically attached to my swim buddy with a rope. We were always in pairs, always connected. Bad news is I'm now taking him to the bottom with me. The good news is that he had the presence of mind to reach up and grab the mini sub before it was too late, sort of stopping the whole thing from cascading. And we were able to recover ourselves, lock back into the submarine, finish the mission, go back out to sea. And one of the other things that we could do with this mini sub, which made it a global capability, is we could rendezvous with and mate on the back of regular nuclear submarines. And this is the ASDS mounted on the back of the Greenville. And the Greenville, unfortunately, became sort of infamous at some point because she had a tragic mishap where she collided with and sank the Hime-Maru, a Japanese fishing trawler. An incident you may recall hearing about in the news because she killed 9 of her passengers. And because we spent a lot of time with the Greenville, I learned a lot about this mishap. And what I learned is that it was entirely preventable. And that on the day of the mishap, when they were getting ready to do the maneuver that led to the mishap, the collision, there were people in the control room who thought to themselves, this feels really bad. This feels like a huge mistake, and they didn't speak up. And they didn't speak up because they believed in the infallibility of their leader. With that commanding officer in charge, making the calls, nothing could go wrong until it did. And this is the problem with cultures of heroic leadership. They expose the system to the human fallibility that is in every one of us. And in the mini-sub business, perhaps because there were people like me, we learned to not take that risk. We questioned everything, and we had redundancy in a lot of places. So it was a very sort of different system. And perhaps because I kept making these mistakes, as you've heard, I stopped being the practitioner and I moved on to being the advisor to senior leaders. And the lesson from this phase was simply that, I had thought that the idea was to profess your knowledge as a leader, and instead what I really came to realize is, no, you don't profess that. You profess your ignorance. When I went back and studied leadership with the Institute, one of the people I interviewed was my old boss, President Bush. And I asked everybody the same question. I said, what did you learn about leadership in your blank years? In his case, 8 years as president. President Bush said, I learned to ask questions. And when I asked him why, we got into it. It was because questions are a form of professing ignorance. They create space. Spent a year with President Bush, eventually went back to the White House with President Obama, spent 5 years with him. Because I was a little bit more senior, I spent a lot more time in the Oval Office. One of the things, also because I was a little bit more senior, I traveled with him more often. One of the trips I took was a week after the raid on Bin Laden. We went down to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and he did a debrief with the team that did the raid, and got a debrief, gave some awards. And then we flew back that night. And on the way back on Marine One, I asked the president, just casually, sort of intended to be casual, like, hey, Mr. President, what'd you think of the debrief? And among other things, he said, I was surprised. And what he was referring to is that when it came time to do the debrief, the way it went down is Admiral McCraven, who was sort of the big admiral in charge of everything, turned over the floor to the ground force commander, who walked up and said, Mr. President, my team will now debrief you. And that was it. Why is that surprising? How many of us would have done that? Right? Nobody does that. It's an example of humble leadership, servant leadership. Leaders who believe that all the power and the knowledge and the credit belongs with the team, not with them. Right? It's incredibly powerful. We know that from our studies. Unfortunately, it's also somewhat rare. It's hard to find. But it's also somewhat misunderstood. If you were to ask that team leader, hey, why did you do that thing? The president was really impressed with that leadership style. Why did you do that? Why do you lead that way? What do you think he said? Because I actually had the opportunity several years later. I went back and asked him that exact question. What do you think he said? He didn't say, because I read your book, took your course. In that case, he said, what choice did I have? How else would you lead a team like that? And here the point's a little bit different. We tend to think that leadership is driven by the leader. And the reality is that the leader really very often doesn't have everything to say about it, because most of it's driven by the context. Leadership can never be made formulaic. Never. There is no template. So we wrote a book, as you heard, with my co-authors, Stan McChrystal, Jay Mangot, Leaders, Myth, and Reality. It opens with this vignette of Washington crossing the Delaware, most recognizable painting in American history. And it opens with this vignette for a simple reason. I happen to know a lot about this one painting. You can go see it. This is one of the larger reproductions you can still find. This is in the Met in New York, and that's my son many years later. I've taken him and my daughter to see it. The other place you used to be able to see it is in the Upper West Wing lobby of the White House. And this is the reason I know so much about this one painting, is I used to spend a ton of time sitting on that couch right underneath the painting. And I would sit on the couch, and they'd bring tour groups through, which is what they do at the White House, or they used to do. And the tour group would come through, and there'd be a tour guide, and they would stop right in front of the coffee table, right in front of me, and the tour guide would give the spiel about the painting over my head. And I heard that spiel 100 times. So I know everything there is to know about the painting. But I don't know anything about the clock on the other side of the room or any of that stuff. And I'm going to tell you what I learned about the painting. But first I want you to take a look at Washington here. This is Washington across the Delaware. And just look at Washington and think of the first word that comes to mind. Don't think about it too much. What do you got? Regal. Regal? Leader. Aristocrat. I like it. Anything else?
I was thinking leader too.
Leader. Okay. Confident. Good. Sometimes people say lazy. He could be helping out a little bit more. Why doesn't he grab an oar and help out? Now I'm going to tell you what I learned about the painting. It's a fiction. There's almost nothing about this painting that's historically accurate. The Delaware River has never frozen this way. That's the wrong flag for this period of American history, right? We'll get our historians on this. Most interesting to me is Washington did not cross the Delaware in a little whaling boat. He was on a 60-foot flat-bottom barge. And so he did some digging, and sure enough, the more accurate depiction of Washington crossing the Delaware, 60-foot flat-bottom barge. But here now, what is Washington doing? He's doing that thing with his left arm, the generals do. What's he doing with his right hand? What's his right hand doing? Steering. Everybody thinks he's steering. He's not steering. He's actually holding on to the wheel of what, Chris? Cannon. The Army guy knows. He's holding on to the wheel of a cannon. That's why he needed a barge. He was bringing his artillery to war. You need a barge. Why is he holding on to the wheel of the cannon? Thank you. Because that's what real people do in a boat at night going to war. They don't do this. Why not? It's ridiculous. Nobody actually leads like this. I have showed this painting now hundreds of times to thousands of people. I always ask the same question. Nobody has ever said Washington looks ridiculous. Because all of us are conditioned to believe in the mythology. We exaggerate what our leaders are capable of. And our leaders, by the way, perpetuate this mythology. So, there's some stuff going on we need to explain. If you were to go to my son's now 8th grade classroom and go in there and look at all the kids, like measure them, study them, assess them, how would you determine who's going to walk out of that classroom and go into life and become a leader? What would you measure? What would you assess? Any guesses? Intellectual curiosity. That's a wonderful answer. Grit is another wonderful answer. Unfortunately, neither of those are what the research suggests. Number one predictor of leader emergence in life is gender. Number two, stature, how high you are. There are even things about the size of one's face. So there's clearly something going on with the way we think about leadership that sort of defies what we're teaching about leadership. There was this great study in the New York Times, published it, called Draw a Leader. Fascinating, and I'll just share sort of the top line result, which is that the most common thing among all the people surveyed when they were asked to draw a leader was sort of this masculinity with some authoritarianism. And for the women in the audience, it is interesting to note that this was true even of the female participants, that there was a bias to features of masculinity. And now, of course, because you can't do anything without mentioning AI at some point, a couple years ago I started asking AI to do an example of this for me. and I asked AI to draw a leader. This is a couple years ago now. This is what I got. This like very sort of weird dystopian thing. More recently, earlier this year, I repeated the exact same prompt, the exact same software, and I'm getting something that maybe is a little bit more measured. Now then I was like, well, wait. What if we ask, draw an effective leader? What do we get? A woman. Which, by the way, reflects the fact that the number one thing you can do to increase organizational performance, or one of the top things, increase gender diversity. Unfortunately, she is wearing a tie, and the rest of the guys are still very authoritarian. So there's a problem with still the way, and this is reflecting the human condition. This is a reflection of what we think. So, I used to run at a leadership institute. We taught leadership. Everyone understands humility is very highly correlated with effective leadership. There is a tremendous amount of literature on this. I talked about it. Servant leadership, humble leadership, very powerful. But when we used to teach, one of the questions we would get is, wait a second. If that's right, how do you explain that guy? How do you explain the fact that one of America's most effective organizations was led by somebody known for their confidence, not their humility, known for their arrogance, really? Or how do you explain that guy? How do you explain the fact that narcissistic personality types are overrepresented in senior leadership positions by far? Those of us who study this owe you an explanation for that. To get to that explanation, and for those of you who missed your breathing exercise this morning, we're going to do some breathing exercises. So if you would with me, take a deep inhalation. And hold it. Can you inhale some more? And hold. Inhale a little more. Okay, go ahead, exhale, Russ. Russ is turning red. Please exhale. I do that to illustrate a very simple and somewhat silly point. You should never do inhalation without exhalation. Never. It's a terrible idea. The two things always belong together. They are amazing and powerful, but only because they're together, even though they're opposites. They are in tension with one another, and they always belong together. This is called a polarity. And it is the most powerful thing in leadership you've never heard of. And it explains the paradox of Steve Jobs. I once asked Ed Catmull about, 10 years ago, I was speaking at a conference with Ed. And we were sitting off to the side, and I said, Ed, you got to tell me this thing about Steve Jobs, because you know Steve Jobs. You worked with him. How do you explain this? And he said, you got to understand, there wasn't one Steve Jobs, there was two. The first Steve Jobs failed at Apple. Apple kicked him out. He went to Pixar, failed again. They kicked him out, sent him back to Apple. He went back to Apple the second time as the second Steve Jobs. And it was the second Steve Jobs who said stuff like this: it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. His point was that Steve Jobs did not become an effective leader because he had confidence. He became an effective leader once he was able to pair his born sense of confidence or arrogance or narcissism with a learned sense of humility. And those two things are often in tension and hard to find together. But when they're brought together, it's powerful. And it makes sense when you think about it. Because very often we need the leader who steps in the room and he says, don't worry about it. It's getting scary. It's ugly. But the future is there. We can get there. Who's with me? Let's go. But then there's part of us that also wants that leader to turn around and be like, whew, I have no idea how we're going to do it. And that's what I need all you to figure out. I'll give you another example. One of the better studies that was done on organizational performance, team performance, Google did on itself. It was called Project Aristotle. And it came up with a number of things I won't go into, but the top of the list Google decided was this thing called psychological safety. Many of you are probably very familiar with psychological safety. The idea has been popularized by Amy Edmondson from Harvard, but it's this idea that you create an environment where people are safe. They are safe to dissent. They are safe to speak up. They are safe to fail, because that's how you create learning. And by learning, you adapt faster than the competition, and that's how you win, right? Very common, popular idea in management science. Create psychological safety, you get a learning environment, you adapt faster, you win, blah, blah, blah. If you ever go hear Amy speak, which I highly recommend, what you will hear her say is, that's not what I said. Go back and reread the original research. That's not what I said. You people keep getting it wrong. To get learning, you don't just need psychological safety. You need psychological safety and accountability. You need a lot of both. If you have too much of one or the other, you just have anxiety or comfort. To get learning, you need a lot of both. And again, this is one of many polarities, this idea that good leaders hold their people accountable and provide safety. And yes, this is a paradox, and yes, it is in tension with itself. You hold people accountable to standards so they can win, and you create safety in an environment where people feel safe to fail. And you have to find a way to do both. This is polarity, and this is one of the most powerful things you can do. If you come down to my hometown of Washington, D.C., you can see this on display. Go visit the Lincoln Memorial. It won't be secured because the government's closed, but it's still open and accessible to the public. And take a good look at Lincoln himself, and you'll notice, among other things, that the sculptor made a very deliberate decision with the hands to represent the two sides of Lincoln's leadership style. One hand is open, representing his tendency for compassion and empathy, and one is in a fist, demonstrating his tendency to hold strength and courage of conviction. And this is, widespread in leadership studies. You'll find this in lots of places. Perhaps the most, and this is advanced stuff, I admit that, and it's very difficult to do in practice. Perhaps the simplest thing I can leave you with is this. Perhaps like me, you've been conditioned to think of leadership like being the grand chess master. You understand the strategy, how the game's played, you know the rules, you're anticipating moves of other players, you're controlling pieces, and you're trying to win. I've heard this metaphor beautifully described to contain leadership, and I think it's fundamentally wrong. I think a better metaphor for leadership is simply gardening. Because gardeners don't make plants grow all by themselves. All the gardener does is provide the ecosystem and be responsive to the needs of that system, whether it be sunlight, water, fertilizer, what have you. We started with my son, the lighthouse. Don't take yourself too seriously. We talked a little bit about owning the outcome, not the decision, about professing ignorance, not knowledge, the more advanced concept of develop polarity and tension in your leadership style, that's actually a good thing, and it explains some of the paradoxes we experience. But if nothing else, think about it this way. Lead a little less like the grand chess master, and instead, lead like a gardener. So with that, thank you again for having me. It's really an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Please welcome PAC's Vice President of Business Development and Operations, Jen DeVore.
Hi, everyone. Oh, Jeff, thank you so much. That was incredible. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen DeVore. I'm Vice President here at PAC. Thank you so much, Jeff Eggers, for sharing your time with us today. Thank you to our host and sponsor of the breakfast and conference, Blink Rome, and of course, our chair, Josh Strober. Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause. So now for the next part of the conference, we're so excited to hear our company's pitch. We're gonna ask you all to please head to the featured company presentation rooms, which will kick off in about 5 minutes. Technology track is on the 5th floor, healthcare track is on the 4th floor, and we have lots of volunteers and signage to help you get directed. Please stop by the PACT membership table too to meet the rest of the PACT team. We have a lot of new faces and some great legacy folks bringing all together today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the conference floor.